So this book has been deeply inspiring to me, Josef Albers' interaction of color. Albers was kind of this amazing artist, but also teacher and scholar. And this book really kind of sets forward this new way of looking at color. And I highly recommend it. It's written beautifully, poetically, and also kind of from the position of a teacher. So it's very kind of accessible, but also really fun, I think. What he talks about one of the things he talks about in this book, this is from his introduction, in visual perception, a color is almost never seen as it really is, as it physically is. This fact makes color the most relative medium in art. So in other words, color is not a static entity, but can shift dependent on what is adjacent to it. And so in this image of Albers here on the side, I think it's just fascinating. He has all of these plates in the book, but this purple that you're seeing up here at the top where my cursor is, we are inclined to believe that this purple and this purple down here, the smaller bit of it, are the same color, right? But it's actually this purple here and this one down here that are the same color. And it's because of the proximity to these different shades that our eyes get thrown off, right? So again, you know, we want to kind of think about color as relative, dependent on what it is adjacent to. And Albers goes on to explain that if one reads or says the word red, all of us will think of different shades of red. That is to say that the label red actually defines a spectrum of colors. And our perception of each of these colors is affected by the conditions of seeing it, right? The other thing that I love about this quote is he kind of offhandedly describes color as a medium, right? Color, the most relative medium in art. And I love that, this idea that we can think of color as a medium rather than something that we're deploying within various media. So we're not thinking of color as a choice of ink or of a choice of watercolor or a choice of paper, but the color itself is carrying the same kinds of considerations as you would bring to your work with a medium like comics, right? I want to turn to how we apply this to or within the realm of graphic medicine. So this is a quote from Tamashi Jackson, who is a contemporary artist. This is from an interview she did in Hyperallergic called The Linguistic Overlap of Color Theory and Racism. Jackson is deeply influenced by Albers's work, and I actually came to Albers through her work. So this quote, the language around de jure segregation is similar to Albers's description of the wrong way to perceive color, as if color is static. Albers concluded that color is relative, and what a viewer perceives a color to be is determined by the color nearest to it. Color is always changing, and contrary to popular belief, it is not absolute. I saw the phenomenon of vibrating boundaries aligned with residential redistricting and redlining. Color theory and human rights are conceptually interwoven in my paintings. I find the language comparisons appropriate metaphors for a critique of racism. So in other words, what she's getting at here is that perceiving color as static lends itself to essentializing and racist, not just attitudes, but legislation and other practices that are deemed legal based on skin color. And recognizing color as relative then is critical to shifting racist perspectives. And this, I'll just show you a couple of examples of how this is playing out in healthcare contexts. This story came out earlier this year from the Washington Post, and this medical student, Malone McWende, noted that there were certain symptoms that appeared differently on different skin tones, and that most medical schools have been teaching to how these conditions appear on less pigmented skin. And so he and his collaborators created this book, Mind the Gap, in order to address those gaps in medical knowledge. Another story that came out just last week is about pulse oximeters and the higher error rate in Black patients. The way that pulse oximeters work is that they send these small beams of light through the skin, and they measure light absorption to determine oxygen levels in blood. And the oximeters are calibrated with white skin in mind, and so readings are often inaccurate for people with darker skin tones. And there are, tons of these examples in healthcare contexts, right? And so just kind of thinking about being more reflective of color, I think is critical in these contexts and others. And I just want to share now a few examples of how this kind of color reflection plays out in comics art. These are some images from Awan Mance's Living While Black series. And you can see that they are using non-representational colors to depict skin tone in these images. And they use brown skin tones as well. And the idea here is of course, they're repeating that term while Black, and then the images with the color variations have this effect of indicting racist color associations. And they have just beautiful, this beautiful series, and you can find it on their Instagram page, which I've included here. I love this recent Instagram post by Whit Taylor that considers if we wanted to approach Santa Claus as a mythical universal figure, what would that figure's skin tone be, right? And then I also want to be careful not to suggest that we should abandon all realist color schemes, but more to emphasize that we should use color reflexively, dependent on your experiences and how the medium of color can enhance your work, and how you might play into or off of the associations we make with certain colors. This is a page from Lale Westvin's Grip, which is just this gorgeous graphic novel that uses super saturated colors. The original was made with a 3-color Riso printing, and it's this beautiful celebration of women's labor and creative imagination. Let's see. Okay. I've been focusing on issues related to personhood, but I briefly want to share some of my own work and how color plays into it. Much of my recent work has focused on environmental and climate health. And I think that one of the problems with our approach to climate change and planet health is that the images we use to talk about it are images that also are comforting or familiar or shareable, like sweet animals and gorgeous landscapes. And so I've been using color as a way to break the charm of that imagery and to fill us with a hint of dread, a little sickness. This is a poster that I did for a climate change concert. And as you can see, I use kind of this very light blue-gray for the orcas' bodies. The sea is pink, and then these just little abstract squares tiling over in this yellow, just again to kind of like shift our conventional perceptions of how we see these animals and the spaces in which they move. These are from a poetry comic series called It's All Over. These are short poems of grief and mourning, and I use different colored tissues to depict the animals. One of the ideas that I'm hoping to get across is what happens when all we have left is representation. So these kind of, again, non-representational colors used to depict the animals. And these are a little treat of a upcoming work that I've been busy working at. It's a book that I'm making called Arctic Play. And in these particular pages, I'm creating a surrealized landscape that uses pink as the primary color. And in that tries to recalibrate our adoration of the distant north and the space it holds in representing climate change.